We play at paste till qualified for pearl. Then drop the paste and deem ourself a fool. The shapes, though, were similar, and our new hands learned gem tactics, practicing sands. We play at paste. So taking a comfortable seat, just arriving in this space, feeling the presence of everyone else. And falling into the present moment, relaxing the shoulders, the muscles of the face, the jaw, around the eyes, the forehead. Lengthening the neck just by a millimeter, ever so slightly, maybe pointing the chin. Feeling your awareness centered in that space between your eyebrows and your forehead. As if a magnifying glass, and that's the part that's looking out. Straightening the back as best you can, and then going down into the chest and just opening up, letting down the drawbridge. Sending all the archers away. Just as an experiment. And then softening the belly. All of the protectiveness and defensiveness. Feeling your feet flat on the floor and your knees as best you can at a right angle if you're sitting. And now we're in it. Feeling the breath rise and fall from the heart to the head, connecting them as one organ called chitta. Just letting a smile open up in your heart. And finding an anchor for your attention, whether it be a sound outside. I hear a bird just outside my window, or the wind coming and going, or the breath breathing in 4 seconds, a little pause at the top, and breathing out for 5. Whatever that anchor is, it's pulling you into this moment. It's pulling you out of the past or worries about the future. This is our practice so that we can, whenever possible, fall into the present moment when we're out in the world and there are so many distractions flashing around us. These are what Emily Dickinson is calling our gem tactics. In the last couple of minutes here, see if you can step back. And if you're having thoughts barraging through your mind, just step back and watch them like those clouds, or hear them like that wind. Just unvelcro yourself from those things you think are you. That little bit of distance, you can't help but smile or feel the playfulness in it all. We Play at Paste by Emily Dickinson. We play at paste till qualified for pearl. Then drop the paste and deem ourself a fool. The shapes, though, were similar, and our new hands learned gem tactics, practicing sands. I've only ever used one other Emily Dickinson poem in these sessions. And even I wonder why, because she's my favorite poet. But I think it's like something that Calvino wrote in Invisible Cities about Marco Polo, where Kubla Khan asks him something like, "Why don't you ever describe Venice, where you're from?" And Marco Polo says, "Every time I describe a city, I'm saying something about Venice." My Venice, my poetry Venice, is Emily Dickinson. Every time I describe a poem, I'm saying something about her. This poem, like many of her great poems, was written in those years of the Civil War. It was written in 1862. And yet, it's a poem about playfulness. And I chose it this week, continuing on the subject of happiness, the problem of happiness, as my friend Colleen Bush calls it, the problem of happiness in difficult times. Robert Bly asks about writing poems. Is this silly? And in a way, Emily Dickinson is saying, are those early games we played, are they silly? Were they just paste jewelry as we waited for the real thing? But before I get to the poem, I want to tell a quick story. And it has to do with the first week that I was in Washington, D.C., 18 years ago. I was coming up the metro from DuPont Circle, and I looked back down the long stairway. And at the bottom of the stairway, there were two people who were also coming up, but they were just entering the stairs. And someone had a bag of groceries, and they dropped the groceries. And out of the grocery bag came a dozen oranges. And the oranges got caught on the stairs and started to roll down the stairs, and they had to turn around and go get the oranges, and they were bouncing around like lotto balls. And it was a hilarious moment because they were both trying very hard to preserve these oranges and get them back into the bag. And I had to laugh to myself looking at them from this distance. But then I heard the other person say, "Christina, you ruin everything." And 18 years later, it brings me to tears. This moment where I thought something light and hilarious was happening was actually deeply entrenched in an old story that I knew nothing about. And that "Christina, you ruin everything" taught me so much about the necessary distance sometimes that we have to take from little moments, little mishaps, little flaws that occur in the day, which we attach to bigger stories in the past. I found it funny because there were no old stories connected to it. But from our closeness and our intimacy, these are things that are not supposed to happen. Or these are things, even worse, that we say always happen. Or these are things that never happen to us. We're looking at them through the lens of judgment and disappointment, and not through the lens of the world at play, the lotto game of experience. This is what we get today. So in a way, those oranges for those folks down at the bottom of the escalator turn suddenly into apples, these fruits of the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of mortality, the knowledge of the past, the worry for the future. And this poem kind of asks us to come back and to remember how the world was when we saw it through the lens of playfulness. And in the first stanza, there are three operant words to me. One is paste, the other is qualified, and the third is ourself. And paste here is, again, fake jewelry made from thick glass. We play in our early years with fake jewelry until we're qualified for the real thing. That word qualified is really interesting because it's the language of job interviews. It's adult language, the language of resumes and work and seriousness. We kind of look back on the playfulness of childhood with disdain. And then the third thing is we deem ourself a fool. Ourself is used in an archaic way here. It's a term that a monarch would use to talk about ourself as the kingdom. So it's something kind of heightened and full of self-importance. Now we take ourself seriously, and even that word deem, we deem ourself as more important than that. But the second stanza seems to reject that idea. And those early forms had similar shapes to the forms that we use now in our daily lives, our so-called serious roles. These were the first shapes of love, the first shapes of poems that we assumed in our early games. I remember my first poems, and for a long time, I just thought they were terrible. But now I kind of look back on them, not only with affection, but I see myself in them still. That 12-year-old writing a poem about time is still here. And it's taken me a long time to welcome him back. And she says, we were learning those gem tactics all along. We were learning gem tactics. It's such a beautiful line. And our new hands learned gem tactics, practicing sands. That last word, sands, too, in the second stanza is so sweet because it's like the sandcastle that we were building as a child. It was for nothing. The sea was going to come and sweep it away anyway. And yet, through our eyes now, we can see that as a highly spiritual activity. I have a friend who calls her Dharma talks sandcastles. Meditation is full of gem tactics too, that we're learning. And we learn by playing and role playing all the time. So let's hear the poem one more time, and then I have a little question for you. We play at paste till qualified for pearl, then drop the paste and deem ourself a fool. The shapes, though, were similar, and our new hands learned gem tactics, practicing sands. Getting back into a comfortable seat. What is this practice for? As Robert Bly asks, is it silly that we would step outside the world to practice being in it? Getting into that position of receptivity. Openness, the flavor of willingness. See if you can't carry it with you for the rest of today. That view from the top of the escalator. To find the delight in the play of oranges. And then I think this is really important too. to also be down there with Christina, to feel karuna, compassion, to know that there's a lot at stake here. It's a poem written in the middle of the Civil War. She seems to be saying that in the darkest time, it's important to remember our playfulness so we can be as present for others as possible. Four counts in, a little pause at the top. Five counts out. What were the gem tactics you were learning, writing your first poems? What were the gem tactics of first love? The bright faith that arises in that feeling of connection. What are the gem tactics of this practice that you can bring into the so-called serious world? Doing that work again of stepping back from whatever thoughts are passing through your mind, emotions. Just watching them pass. Here's Thich Nhat Hanh. We ruminate on our hatred, suffering, and despair, and it's not healthy food. Our mindful breathing and steps are able to pull us out of thinking and help us to be in touch with the wonderful things of the present moment, nourishing us and bringing us back the joy of being alive. This poem is really about remembering the joy of being alive, that sand glass was actually this real stuff of life. Three more breaths. We play at paste till qualified for pearl. Then drop the paste and deem ourself a fool. The shapes, though, were similar, and our new hands learned gem tactics, practicing sand.